A report from Group 17 by Robert C. O'Brien, Chapter 9. In the morning, in his room at Villa Petrograd, Dr. Schutz sat in an armchair and considered Georg Wolter. He was uncertain about Georg. As an assistant in the laboratory, he was a competent, though unimaginative biologist, thorough and careful. Moreover, he had the mechanical aptitude which had proved invaluable on this particular series of experiments with so much equipment to keep in order. But Georg was a literal-minded Bavarian, with a stolid respect for orders and regulations. Theoretically, he took orders from Dr. Schutz, but Georg was also aware that they both took orders from a higher authority, and that they had been forbidden a human subject for their experiment. A more delicate point, Georg, like himself, had worked in the secret laboratories of Novokuznetsk, where they had used human subjects extensively and without qualms, where, indeed, one of Dr. Schutz's main interests was in using human subjects more effectively, of keeping them docile and cooperative, in delicate experiments where the subject's own help, even enthusiasm, was essential. Georg would not be squeamish about using the girl as a subject, and as a biologist, unlike Kublitz, would recognize the value of doing so, since in the end their research was to be applied to humans, not monkeys. But value was one thing, absolute necessity was another. Georg might be frightened. Value, yes, but what about the risk? What if they were caught? They themselves were also prisoners, though this was never discussed, nor openly admitted. Dr. Schutz was an ex-Nazi, Georg a refugee from West Germany, where if deported home he would face a trial for some offense unknown to Dr. Schutz. If Georg refused to cooperate, if Georg insisted on letting the girl go, or told Kublitz, what then? That must not be permitted to happen. It would then be up to him to convince Georg that the girl was not merely valuable to the experiment, but absolutely essential. To do that, he would have to let Georg into his confidence and tell him of the plan he had told no one else. That was a step he was most loath to take. He did not want to trust Georg. Over the years, he had learned to avoid, when possible, trusting anyone. Actually, he thought, the risk to them was minimal, virtually non-existent. A girl had disappeared at night on the bank of a river just above a dangerous rapids. How could anyone, even the most suspicious of police, connect this event with two biologists in a laboratory of whose existence they were completely unaware? It was this fact that he must stress when he talked to Georg. If that proved ineffective, there would still be time to consider alternatives. He rose from his chair and looked out the window. His rooms, an office living room, bedroom, and bath were in the rear of the Villa Petrograd on the third floor. They were small but comfortable, originally designed, he had been told, for the secretary of the old Russian Duke, Orlov, who had built the place. His window overlooked a handsomely landscaped lawn and garden, behind which were 2 tennis courts and a field where, on weekends, younger members of the Red Diplomatic Corps played soccer. Off to the right, obscured from his window by trees, stood the small zoo of which he was, or so the diplomats were encouraged to believe, the curator. Actually, the work in the zoo itself, the feeding and cleaning of cages, was done by a member of the groundskeeping staff, a stupid and quite ill-natured peasant named Nikolai, who spoke only Russian and took orders from Kublitz. He walked down the hall to Georg Wolter's room and knocked. He carried with him a copy of a German newspaper, the Münchener Tageblatt. Their newspapers, grudgingly provided by Kublitz, came through the embassy in Washington, where they were read first and where some items were clipped for filing, so that they arrived tattered and averaged a month late. Still, Dr. Schutz always read them carefully, noting with particular interest certain names in the political news. Georg was seated in a chair by the window, staring out, waiting. He took the bedraggled newspaper without enthusiasm, glanced at it, tossed it on his bed. "We go now?" He spoke in German. "In a moment. There is a matter to discuss." Dr. Schutz shut the door and came abruptly to the point. "We have obtained a human experimental subject in the laboratory." "Ah, so?" Wolter was startled. "But Kublitz has said—" "Kublitz knows nothing. I obtained the subject myself. You? But how was that possible? Someone was spying on us, watching us over the wall. Over the wall? But that cannot be. There is a small tree outside the wall behind the laboratory. I heard someone climbing in it. While we were working, I found footprints under it yesterday. I opened the gate just a bit, and as I hoped, the spy came through. I was waiting outside. I had with me a hypodermic of pentothal and curare. But that's dangerous. He will be missed. There will be a search, and Kublitz will hear of it. I think not. The intruder turned out to be quite insignificant. A girl. A girl? A small change of expression passed over Walter's face. Who is she? A girl of 12 years, perhaps 13. One may assume she lives in the neighborhood. Fortunately, she was riding a bicycle. I took the liberty of moving it to the bank of the river, placing it in such a position that it is obvious that she fell into the water. The girl has drowned. We were instructed to stay within the walls at all times. Walter seemed, however, no longer to be seriously protesting. It took only a few minutes. By doing so, I removed any possibility of a serious investigation. If the police think the girl has drowned, they will wait for her body to rise and be found. They will search along the river, but they will know that it may be weeks before anything happens. And when it does not, they will never be sure, of course. In drowning, as you know, the victims are not always found. But in any case, in 2 weeks, we will no longer have need of her. If the police inquire, then, and Kublitz suspects, there will no longer be evidence. Georg Walter shrugged. It is your responsibility. You have given her sedation, hypnotics, the dipenolithol series. They are not always entirely dependable. With her, they have worked perfectly. I stayed with her for the whole series, all night. She is highly retentive. She memorized the entire set of instructions verbatim the first time. Nonetheless, I taped them and played them back 3 times with each new injection. She will not forget now until she is re-instructed. In any case, if necessary, I can change to selenoids. Dr. Schutz opened the door, and they set out for the laboratory. Walter had yielded more easily than he had expected. He felt elation for the first time in many years. His plan, so long dreamed, remained his own private possession. This time, both of the animal keepers came in. They talked to each other for a little while in a language that Allie could not understand. The young one kept staring at her through the cage wall in a funny way. Then the old keeper, the doctor, opened her cage door and spoke to her. "You will come out?" he said in English. She stepped out of the cage, which was just high enough so that she could stand upright. "You will walk to the end of the room, open the door, and enter the bathroom. You will close the door. You will use the bathroom as before. You will open the door and return to the cage." Everything he said was true. Thus it all happened as he said. When she returned to the cage door, the young keeper stared at her again. She went in, and they closed the door and locked it with a key. They had put some sandwiches and water in the cage on the floor. "You are hungry," said the doctor. "You are thirsty. You will eat the sandwiches and drink the water." The sandwiches were toast and butter, wrapped in a paper napkin. They were cold and greasy, but she ate them anyway because she was hungry. The 2 men had begun a discussion in the other language. In a few minutes, still talking, they opened a door across from her cage and went into another room. They closed the door behind them, but while it was open, she saw that the room they were entering was a small hallway, leading to a 3rd room, much larger than the one she was in. It had no cages, but was full of machines and instruments she did not recognize at all, things of shining steel and glass, with switches and tubes and dials. On the wall were shelves covered with jars, bottles, and glass dishes. They closed the door, and a moment later she heard a motor running quietly, and the throbbing sound of a pump. Mrs. Adam found the can of worms under Allie's bed and carried them out to the garden. She turned the can upside down, tapped the bottom, lifted it, and watched the wriggling mass begin the slow process of untangling itself and finding the way back into the darkness of the fresh plowed earth. The garden was ready to plant. She had bought the seeds weeks ago, peas, beans, greens, lettuce, and the rest. She stood up and looked at the ground. She could not do it. The idea had no meaning. No impulse accompanied it. Like Allie, it was dead. And yet maybe she could. Maybe she must. Things that had been done with purpose, with trouble, with joy, must now be done mechanically, the motivation replaced by the dry knowledge that they had been done before and therefore should be done again, like old religious rituals. Possibly, if she did them, the meaning would return. But she did not believe that. The household had been stalwart. The family had been strong enough to withstand another blow, but not this one, because this one removed the center of the family so that it tilted and fell inward and was no more. John came out. She thought he was coming to her, but he did not. He walked down the drive to the road and turned right, down the hill toward the river. His face looked calm enough, but he did not speak. And so she worried and called after him, "John, be careful, please." She did not know what else to do. He was still young enough to believe that he needed to believe what he needed to believe, which was that Allie was not dead, but alive somewhere, waiting to be found. She thought, he must be going to the rapids to look. He was strong, he was a skillful swimmer, but the rapids was a dangerous place for anyone. For the moment, his delusion was his good fortune. He remained undaunted while she despaired, while Willis stayed desolate in his room. But she dreaded the time surely coming when the fact, in the form of his sister's found body, would strike his youthfulness, a wound all the more grievous for being delayed and resisted. Willis, alone in his room on his bed, had stopped crying and was looking at the pictures in Heidi. The last thing Allie had given him. Not given, lent. He would put it back on her shelf later, maybe tomorrow. She would not mind if he kept it another day. He saw a picture of the gate in front of Heidi's grandfather's house, and it made him think of the gate Allie had gone through that he had not told about, and would not. She had only gone 2 steps in to look. Still, she must have seen something to watch, or she would not have stayed inside until it got dark. He wished she had not let him wait for her. Then, when she came out, he could have told her she was going the wrong way. He put his head on the book and presently fell asleep. He was still asleep about half an hour later and did not hear the soft sound of Allie's bicycle wheels rolling down the drive, nor see John, who had come back to get the bicycle, putting on the brakes as he turned right down the hill. And that is the end of chapter 9.